kind of monitoring both spaces. And welcome everyone. This is another edition of ArtEvolve. I am Annika Eriksson, founder and CEO of Articheck. I am also part of a consortium which is called AIS, Artwork Identification Standard. And I'm here today to speak with Nicole and also Carrie, who are both members of AIS. Carrie will be joining us shortly. She's running slightly late. But Nicole, I will take this opportunity to introduce. She is with us. She joined as a member from Crozier, and I want to make sure I get your title correct. The Senior Director of Product Strategy and Technology at Crozier. Thank you and welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks, Annika. So, and I see we've got Carrie too. Yeah. Yay. So yeah, hi, I'm really excited to be part of this. So my role is at Crozier, I started as a project manager, which it's a lot of folks at Crozier in that role now today. And I grew up through the business, kind of trying to make ways that we work more consistent and scalable, which led me into the technology side. And so now today, my role is leading the Crozier technology team, partnering with our enterprise technology organization with Iron Mountain, of which we're a part, and helping Crozier think about the products of the future. So that very naturally lends itself to the discussion that's happening with the AIS team. And I'm really excited to be here today. Thanks for
Great. Thank you. And Carrie Kilty joins us from Authentify. And Carrie is the Chief Revenue Officer there. And so thank you for joining us, Carrie. Carrie is also a member of AIS, which we will explain in more detail in a second. But first, Carrie, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role at Authentify?
Sure, absolutely. I come, and I apologize if there's background noise. We're in Brooklyn today doing some imaging for one of our artists for the event that's upcoming. I started in the technology space, infrastructure and networking, telecommunications, and I came over to Authentify. I was introduced to the art world a few years ago, based upon the need of technology adoption in the space, and a friend of mine at the time saying, this would be a really good, interesting place for you to be. And I shortly met Authentify team. And I became so passionate about the needs and the desires, and seeing and understanding how the industry worked, and seeing, the challenges that there were and the obstacles to overcome, and being part of building those solutions. So while my role at Authentify is out there figuring out product market fit and where we go, what are the revenue streams, it's very much also about finding the solutions and being able to hash those out and see where are the holes and where are the vulnerabilities, and how do we build solutions for the future and continue to get better.
Great, thank you. Yes, and many opportunities and holes to fill there are.
For sure.
Yeah, I think those of us that working in technology and art have seen that there is some work to be done. So let's begin. I also just want to apologize if I have a 5-year-old running in the room. That could happen. Sorry for everyone. But childcare stuff, COVID.
Yeah, we're actually right near the Brooklyn Bridge. We're right near the Brooklyn Bridge, so it's interesting when the train goes by.
Right. Okay. Well, you hit that mute button when you need to. So I have a few questions and kind of talking points to cover here. One thing that I want to do right off the bat is to discuss briefly, kind of introduce everyone to AIS and what it is. You might be thinking, yeah, what the heck is this AIS thing? It stands for Artwork Identification Standard. And the idea really is to create a framework through which we can bring together some of the fractured and siloed data that exists in the art world. And so actually, like going back a step, what are the problems that AIS is trying to solve? Well, one big problem that we kind of can see in the art world, or one challenge, is that a lot of people have a sense that their data is valuable and they therefore don't want to share it. And yes, in theory, this data is valuable, but only if you can leverage that value, right? And everyone just holding on to it and keeping it secret and close to their chest does not value leverage. So that is one of the challenges that we face in the art world. This lack of sharing of data or access to data, and all kinds of different data points. And of course, we know that another thing that people are very conscious of and concerned about is privacy and confidentiality. And that is a major element to our thinking and our approach, because we're all art world experts and we all understand that that is paramount. But that is, yes, a challenge to make sure. People would ask me when I started ArtEvolve 7 or 8 years ago, and I was talking about this cloud solution at the time. People were like, is everyone going to be able to see my condition reports? Is it available to everyone because it's on the cloud? And I was like, no. That is not what cloud computing means. And nowadays, people pretty much understand that that's not what cloud computing means, although I still occasionally get that question. But so, now the kind of next great leap forward in people's understanding of technology is blockchain, right? We have this buzzword people are talking about and how it might be utilized in the art world, but people don't really necessarily understand what it is and how we make use of it. And are we just trying to make use of it for the sake of it because it's a new exciting technology that actually doesn't really have any, bearing or weight on what we do in the art world? And so, my own personal reasons of getting involved with AIS were really to have a network of other people that were exploring blockchain and how it could be utilized and what kind of smart way of doing it would be, because people had already been asking me for years, if ArtEvolve was on the blockchain, if we were utilizing blockchain technology, and just assuming that I was like a blockchain expert, which I was not. But I thought I better get to know about this stuff because people expect me to. And so the other thing that I think is really important to kind of call out in terms of problems that we're solving, hopefully, with AIS, is, well, which is kind of in a way saying the same thing in a different way, which is about symmetry of data, right? And I think that AIS will have some great use cases in the public sector in terms of deeper research. I think that's one of the major benefits for the public sector, and as well as new revenue channels, which we'll kind of get into in a little bit. But in terms of the commercial sector, one thing, if you're looking at the long term of the health of the art market that will benefit all of us that are concerned with the commercial art market, is that it be a healthy art market, right? We all want that. Nobody, even in the museum sector, in the public space, nobody doesn't want the art market to be healthy, right? So because it benefits artists and galleries and shippers, all the different players, auction houses, et cetera. We all benefit from there being a healthy market. And as you may be aware, the kind of general buyers in the art market, they say that there's like 5,000 really serious kind of professional level buyers in the art market, right? And a lot of those 5,000 people have been aging. And there's this kind of next generation of collectors that are coming onto the market, we hope. And also there are professional investors who have been interested in the art market and art as an asset class. But one of the challenges for the professional investors who see art as potentially an asset class has been due diligence or a lack thereof, right? They have had a problem with the lack of transparency of pricing information and condition information and just information full stop, the end, right? It's difficult for them to get a hold of, and it has made them kind of scared off from entering the market like with any kind of seriousness. There's a few art funds nowadays, and we're talking about fractionalized ownership via blockchain in the future and all kinds of exciting things, but none of that will happen without a healthy market that is driven by symmetric data. And what do we mean by that? That is an economic term where the buyer and the seller both have access to the same kind of basic data points, right? And so there is a very famous economic paper called A Market for Lemons, which was about the used car market. It was written in the 1970s, I think. And it said that, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with a company called Carfax, but so when people were selling used cars in the old days, other people were worried about buying a lemon, right? They did not want to buy a lemon, of course. And so how could you give the buyer more confidence that you weren't selling them a lemon? Well, you had to have, you know, all of your maintenance records and your paperwork to demonstrate that you have looked after this car. And so Carfax is a company that has all of that information in one place digitally, in order to give buyers an increased confidence in what they're buying. And that has worked very well in the used car market and in other industries. And so there is an idea in the economic circles that, you know, it's really essential to have symmetric data in any marketplace for it to be healthy, especially in the future, especially when you're going online and digitizing. You probably have experience, I know I have, buying clothes and products and all kinds of things online. We're all becoming more and more sophisticated online shoppers. And if I don't know the condition of something that I'm buying online, or, you know, other important kind of points, the dimensions, have you ever bought something and it arrives and it's like it's tiny thing compared with what you thought in the picture? You know, it's much, much smaller, or it's much bigger, or it's like the dimensions are wrong, or it's not in the right condition. That is, you know, if you're a buyer online, you'll just go somewhere else. You won't take a chance on something normally. The art world, yes, is a little different than a lot of other industries, but you can still make some of the same assumptions about consumer behavior online in the art world that you can from other industries. So there's a lot for us to learn from other industries, especially from the fashion industry, high value goods, you know, adjacent markets. And in all of those markets that have gone online and have scaled really well as a result of it, guess what? They have symmetric data. So that's the future that we need to move towards, people, essentially. And the thing that will help us do that is creating the structure, a sort of beacon, if you like, by which we have this unique identifier that we are working to create. And the idea is that you have like a public layer of data and a private layer of data, and that with this unique identifier, let's call it something like a, you know, an art world deep Google, right? You get a hold of this number, just as an example use case. I am an interested private collector, and there is a sculpture that I'm very interested in that is up for sale at Sotheby's. I get a hold of this number and I type it in, and I find that there are, you know, a dozen different data points around this object. Okay, I can see on the public layer of data that it has been sold at Christie's 14 years ago. But if I want to know for how much, then I have to pay a fee, right? And so Artery is one of the members of AIS, and they have already bought like millions of sale results from Christie's and Sotheby's. And so they probably would be the content provider that would be providing that bit of data. And so they would get a proportion of the fee, and then the data owner would get a proportion of the fee. In this case, it would be probably Christie's or the owner, or both. And so then let's say that also this piece was exhibited at the Met 4 years ago. And if I want to see the ArtEvolve condition report, then I pay a fee to see that condition report and what condition it was in at the time. Maybe the curator at the Met also wrote an article for the catalog that mentioned this piece, and you want to get a copy of that catalog. Maybe that leads you to finding out this curator is an expert on that period and this artist, and then you can contact that curator. Maybe, there's kind of, it can be endless and just go on and on and on. You can have authentication information, you can have title registry information, you can have provenance information, you can have, catalog raisonnés on this thing. There's all kinds of possibilities. Also, in terms of service providers, you also have an opportunity to make workflows more efficient. That can be true for insurance. That can also be true for shipping. Over to you, Nicole. What do you think about the shipping element of all this?
Yeah, so no, it's a really good point, and there's so many areas of opportunity. So I'm glad you've covered all of them, but I'm glad you mentioned shipping. I mean, I think from my perspective, what Crozier does really well is we help our clients make decisions about how to achieve their goals while mitigating the risk to the art, right? And then we of course execute on the goals, and we do that with them. But that could be an exhibition, that could be a private installation, it could be helping them digitize the work. Unfortunately, a lot of the time on our end gets spent gathering information, right? And that's because there's not enough information. We don't have all the dimensions. We don't know the weight. What's the medium? That information is not always easily available. We've actually become really good at finding that information and researching it and synthesizing it, but that's not really what we're really, really good at. What we're really good at is coming up with those solutions. And I would love it for a Crozier team to be able to spend more time doing that really valuable work and less time on the kind of more administrative stuff. So I think, you could think about this identifier, and if it had information about size that was reliable, about size and physical properties and weight, but it also could have some information about global trade, for example. An object only really should get classified under the harmonized tariff schedule once in its lifetime, but every time it goes over a border, we redo that. And there's a whole bunch of information if you have something traveling for that falls under CITES, for example, right? You have to regather that information every time you do that transport. If that were something that was available to the AIS beacon as well, that could really kind of ease up some of these kind of trade frictions that we have today. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity.
Great point. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there is a lot of duplication of effort when it comes to shipping artwork. I can tell you from when the days of yore when I used to work in a museum space, I was doing condition reports for every project, over again. So there was a lot of duplication of effort there. And I think that, there's a lot of paperwork associated with artworks and their, physical characteristics and provenance and all kinds, catalog information, lots of different aspects that ends up being duplicated even within. I mean, I was talking about this yesterday with somebody, I won't name names, but at a major museum who was saying, I'm just used to having to, retype information in 3 different places within my organization, right? And so, unfortunately, that is the reality that a lot of people working in the art space live in, is that not only is this a duplication of effort across the lifetime of an artwork as it touches different organizations in different hands, but even, within one organization.
Absolutely. And I want to throw one other thing in there, which is, because of that, you might say, oh, well, poor Crozier, you guys have to type more. We can handle that. But what happens is that slows down the process of planning an exhibition. That slows down the process of, being able to do, again, on all parts of the trade and all parts of the industry, the things that we really want to be focused on. And because of that, because it makes it more costly to put together an exhibition plan, it means it introduces risk to those things as well, whether that's to the art or on the budget itself, right? So a lot of our budgeting, honestly, when we work with people who don't have all the information, we have to start anticipating what ifs if we don't have all the information. If we can take some of that what if conversation out, that would be advantageous across the board.
Absolutely. And I think you can compare this with kind of digitizing in general. Like, for example, when we were setting up Articheck, as a SaaS company, we have to kind of find this balance, which is constantly shifting and changing in terms of, from when we started, because, normally a SaaS company has pretty much no interaction with its client base. It's very much like, Spotify, when you think of, these Netflix or one of these kinds of companies, you wouldn't expect to kind of get on the phone with them or have a lot of back and forth emails or interactions or training sessions, or, a lot of the admin kind of interfacing that we do with our customers is because we work in the art industry, and that's how they do business, and that's how they expect to do business. And so we're constantly trying to get to a point where it's, a little more automation, a little more efficiency, a little more automation, a little more efficiency, because ultimately it would be nice, because we have SaaS prices for us to also have a true SaaS model, because the reason that SaaS products can be as cost efficient as they are, the reason your Disney Plus account costs £6 a month is because they don't have all of that administration, right? They don't have a team of customer support people anticipating the needs of every user that's using Disney Plus. That would be crazy, right? And you would need to pay thousands of pounds a month or whatever instead of 6. So, there's a reason that things are set up this way. And it's because, you can scale with efficiency and automation. It brings about the possibility of scaling. Which means that, your overheads can go down, your margins can go up, and it's kind of better for everyone. And I think that the shoe hasn't quite dropped for the art world, that that could be a future for the art world, commercially speaking, instead of the way business is done now. And it's difficult, because I think people are used to this idea of, exclusivity and things being rarefied and difficult to obtain, and the kind of culture and drama around all of that. And that kind of seems to pervade into every facet of the art world, the service provision, kind of everything. And so anyway, it's a slightly different approach, but it's one that most other industries in the world have taken, and have had success in taking that approach. So Carrie, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Authentify and how it relates to AIS?
Sure, yeah. Authentify is, ultimately, we're a data company. And so all of the things that we talk about normalizing the data, about standardizing the data, about teaching people the importance of the data, about making it efficient to collect and protect and vault that data, that is our mission, right? And that's what we're out here because of all of the reasons that we just spoke about. And even with all of this technology, with the blockchain technology, with everything that's developing, it still comes back to having, a normalization of veracity of that data. There's so much duplication and inability to access or research things in the space. It happens all the time. People are like, oh, I have this painting, I have this thing, and it's like the most unique, it's the most rare, and just being able to gather research and information about that more easily would really open up the participation in the market, right? And that's what you're referring to, Annika, about, just being able to, you can get more information shopping about your pair of sneakers, right, than you can, maybe $1 million painting. And it's challenging, and I think it's confusing to what could be a really large, market participation. So we see with, and for us with AIS, it's so important and so pivotal to this mission that we all have about being able to connect and communicate better together and work better together as service providers, as an industry as a whole, and having a third-party standard, right, that is out there for all of us to participate in the development of, but that it stands on the outside of all of our commercial corporate space, right? And so it's really this ability to be objective, right, and a disinterested party that's trying to provide this service that will allow us to more seamlessly communicate with each other, right? And so say if there is a collector on our platform that wants to ship something through Crozier and they want to be able to give access to that information to Crozier, then Crozier says, well, here's my ID number. And we're like, great, you're verified. Boom, here you go. Here's your key, here's your access. And then they can come in, they can get everything that they need. And it's there for the exact reasons that Nicole was talking about. Like these processes that you go through, especially with logistics, like we want to share art. We want to move it around the world. We want to give that experience to people. But when you come to customs and you're doing, you're getting through that, it can be arduous. And then we're repeating that process over and over. And there's times if you have to repeat that process or you lose that data, then you can't move it, right? Because of different things, right? Different materials that are on it that now make it more challenging and difficult. So it's so vital and so important, and especially as we're seeing all this development in new technology, to peel it back to say, okay, we got to figure out these simple steps to be able to work together so that we can all figure out, how to be able to do this securely, yet also have these open doors to be able to work together. So that's where we come from, with AuthentifAct. Yeah.
So let's talk about, you bring up a few good things that I think we should talk about in kind of simple, straightforward terms. And one of those is the fact that AIS is a nonprofit consortium, and that we thought that was basically essential to it being a, as you said, a third party, disinterested party that is not making any money from this identifier existing, right? That was essential to it actually happening and it being accepted by the industry, because it kind of goes back to this whole, my data is important idea. And I'm not just going to hand it over to someone else that's going to make money out of it and cut me out, right? And so that was really an important decision that was made when AIS was formed 2 years ago now. And I think that in my mind, that's the only way it would happen, because people don't want, if a big company like, I don't know, Christie's or Sotheby's or one of these, big auction houses suddenly owned all of this data, people would be very concerned about that. And so it's really important that people understand that that is not going to happen. And also the other point is, why blockchain? How is blockchain, an element of this? And so a distributed ledger also seems like the best option in terms of this concern over, one entity having the keys to the castle, right? And having all the power in that. And so maybe, Carrie, you're very knowledgeable about NFTs and blockchain and stuff. Do you want to try and give us a very kind of basic explanation of, why blockchain for something like this? And keep in mind that some people in the audience may not know anything about blockchain whatsoever.
Yeah, sure. I think you can very simply, I think you kind of hit it on the head, right? It's about this ledger. So every time you have a transaction that's connected to the blockchain, it's on a public ledger, depending on what network you're on, but it's there for you to see and for you to follow that transaction back to the point of origin, to its place where it's, going to, and you can see that. So it just gives that visibility and that transparency that's so important. Now, I think I really like to preface that the blockchain infrastructure is built and it works, but there's a lot of UI and UX and tools that we need to build, which are not built. And it's even more important as a community to come together and say, we need to build these together, right? While the back end technology, the infrastructure is really just simply that. It's a ledger, right? It's taking every time you do anything. So if I was going to send something to Nicole and I was like, all right, I'm going to execute this, I hit the enter button and boom, it goes to Nicole. There's just a mark of that, just gets noted. I sent this to Nicole at this time, and it's never removed. You can't take it out. You can go back to that and say, okay, well, I had to send this to Nicole, but I had to do this other thing. And then that's another note on the ledger. And all of our activity just keeps piling and piling and piling. So we really have this comprehensive experience of what's happening. And so that I think that's all the value. Go ahead.
So I think it's good to mention here that, for example, in our system, and I'm sure this is true of yours too, in our system in ArtEcheck, there is a history, like you were talking about, of everything that people do within our database, but that is confined to our database, right? If you want to have a history of activity across multiple databases, that's where you need something like a blockchain. And so I think just in terms of people kind of understanding, why.
Yeah, it's about what you want to share, right? Because you have to remember that the blockchain is that the mission of the blockchain is for public access. And so it's all, again, there's a lot happening in the world. There's a lot of different things. There's private networks, there's public networks. But the purpose that we would be doing is what we call a public blockchain. And so that we could all see that. And so you would be picking very particular information that you would put out there and share, right? And so specifically, like we're talking about, like the transactions, the interactions between all of us using this identifier, this ID, so that that ID lives on the blockchain. And so every time it moves around and it does something, which is like the keys to your access. So you see that Nicole came to our system, she accessed it, but you don't get to see what she saw when she's in, right? That's where like the door closes. And so now we can see when Nicole left, right? Because she's leaving again, and we're like, okay. But then again, when she gets back into her own system, it closes. So it just, I think it's the step one to being able to open up this opportunity for all of us to be able to share and work together in a more seamless way, so that we can cut back on some of those efforts that we are duplicating. And I think that's why we're choosing, right, to use this as the technology for the development.
And so for people that have security and privacy and confidentiality concerns, let's talk about that for a minute. So you mentioned like the door shutting, and you can't see what it is that you shared with Nicole. You just see that there's a record that Nicole accessed something, and that's pretty much it, right? So there's a lot of kind of potential layers. This is like an onion, right, where it may be that the owner of the artwork in question is the only one that has access to all of the layers of the onion, and whereas different service providers have access to different levels and layers, and based on what the owner thinks is appropriate for their needs as a service provider. And the other thing that I think is really important to call out here is that currently that data is being shared, and PS, it's being shared in the least secure method possible often, which is email, right? So when people are like, oh no, I'm really scared about my data being available on this thing, it's like, well, guess what? Your data is already being transferred onto the internet all the time. The difference
and you
is
can't
that,
see it, and you don't know
right,
where it's going. Yep.
Yeah, so currently, it's being shared in a way that is not very secure from a cybersecurity and risk perspective. And I'm sure, there are companies that are, have their own set of security protocols to try and improve upon that situation. At ArtEcheck, for example, we have with our condition report data, we have lots of different security protocols in order that, and we always encourage people to share through the system so that it's more secure than doing it through email. But I know that and that's just about condition reports, and that's just about our customers, and that's just, a tiny sliver and fraction of the art market as a whole. And even within our customer base, there's plenty of people that still just export PDFs and share those by email because that's how they're used to doing it. And so, the only way to go from a security perspective is up in terms of security protocols. So I don't know if either of you want to say anything else about privacy or confidentiality or security and your thoughts.
I mean, I think it's just really important to stress that when we talk about public blockchain, that doesn't mean every detail of everything is public, right? You're back to your onion. I mean, I'm just reinforcing that. I think that because I think that that's a kind of a misconception. And I like how Carrie put it, like, this is just a piece of a broader place that this is going. And that's one of the kind of the reasons why I like the model we're taking with AIS of this beacon approach, if you can call it that, which, like it makes it lightweight from a technology perspective. That's great. But it also means that we're able to sort of serve the needs of a variety of players in the art world, right? So there are some people who legitimately need to keep things private and secure, and this allows for that. And then there are other things that we do want to put out into the public sphere more broadly. It allows for that as well. So I think that that's, that to me is like a really important factor in all of this. And I just I couldn't stress that part enough. I think that's going to be one of the challenging places too, just to figure out some of those details. But because we're taking this lightweight approach, you can start with the core, right? And then start to kind of fill out those slightly more rarefied use cases, through the partners that are part of the AIS project. So I think it's exciting.
Thank you. So one other thing that I want to quickly cover is one of the common comparisons that we make with AIS is to an ISBN number, right? And also an IBAN number. And so with the ISBN number, what are the benefits of that, right? What good does an ISBN number do for books, for publishers, for writers, for illustrators, for everyone involved in the publishing industry, and libraries, at bookstores, and et cetera? Well, what it means is that having an ISBN number improves the likelihood that your book will be found and purchased, because it means that it will be included in databases that booksellers and libraries use to find books. It links to essential information about your book. It enables more efficient marketing and distribution of your title. So that's from an article on the benefits of ISBN numbers that I just looked up. So I think that we can, draw parallels to the art market in terms of why that might be useful. And I think that one of the really interesting things too, I'm gonna put the light on, is that traditionally in the art market, the private and the public sector, are very separate, even though, the artwork is just the artwork, right? And it will go into private hands, and it will go into museums, and it will be seen by academics, and it will be seen by, auction house professionals or shippers, or, the artwork itself will move through the public and the private sector in its lifetime. And the public and the private sector also work together on different projects. We have relationships with each other, and yet there's still this kind of silo of, standards, approaches, all kinds of elements. And so I think that more of my hope is that for AIS, that this is a way of kind of bringing those sectors kind of more closely together in terms of having access to deeper and more meaningful research and data points. And so one more use case example that I can give from doing use cases for AIS as one of my little homework projects for the consortium was a real life scenario, which was when I have a friend who I met at a private view, who's at Victoria Miro, who's a Italian collector. He also actually works in the art publishing business and has published catalog raisonnés for Rubens and different artists. And he has this cartoon by Beltraffio, who was Leonardo da Vinci's kind of best student of a few of the figures from The Last Supper. He actually grew up right across the street from The Last Supper and loved it. And so when it came up for auction at Sotheby's like 40 years ago, he bought it. And anyway, he has had various academics in to come and have a look at this set of drawings over the years. And one of them, he told me that he couldn't like remember all the names of different people. He told me like somebody from the British Museum came, and he said that the paper was good and Renaissance, and somebody from this came and that came. But he actually took me to the London Library, where he showed me this volume where this Italian academic wrote him a letter and published it in his book instead of sending it to him directly, that said basically, something doesn't feel right about these. Something in my gut says these are wrong. These are, 19th century knockoffs. And my friend was very hurt by this. And of course, it's like, in the public realm now that there's some doubt over the authenticity. And of course, there's not a shred of evidence around that doubt of authenticity. It's a gut feeling situation, which happens in the art world. And so, he was pretty upset by this. And I later on happened to be flicking through, because he couldn't remember the name of this historian who looked at the paper. I was later flicking through after moving to Hastings and unpacking my bookcase to see, are these books bringing me joy? And I happened to flick through this book I have here on the shelf somewhere. Let's see if I can find it again. Here it is. And I was like, I'm not practicing conservation anymore. Do I really need the Edinburgh Conference 2006 icon journal? Not so sure. I was flicking through it though, and then I found, oh, guess what? Here's the article on my friend's draw. There it is. There's one of them. What's going on here? And I found the forensic evidence that showed that this was Renaissance paper, and there was various forensic analysis and proofs that it wasn't just some 19th century knockoff. And I took pictures of the article and sent it to my friend, and he was very happy. And so we thought, okay, there's a few problems here. One problem is that I had to randomly flick through a journal I had in my possession to know that article existed. And what kind of random circumstance that was that I happened to find that. And it's not good to leave these things to fate. It would be nice if that were easy to search, right? And the other thing is, like, where is the place where we can set the record straight publicly for everyone in the world to know that actually here's this proof that this thing is authentic, right? Nowhere. That such a place doesn't exist and should. I would argue. So, AIS could in the future potentially become that place and that repository for this kind of scenario and situation to not occur, hopefully, in the future. So,
yeah, it would be nice to have a place that you could have all of the opinions and all of the things, right? Good or bad, like whatever it is, and let you be let you make your own decision about those opinions so that you can read them all, right? And assess, because like you said, you can't even remember what book it's in or where it is or where the reference. I think it's such a vital point for our industry, right?
Yes, and that also brings up one other thing that I've heard before at several events about blockchain, and the major concern that I've heard people say about blockchain in the context of art is this whole problem with I'm trying to think of a nicer way to say this: poop in, poop out, bad stuff in, bad stuff out.
Yes,
right?
Yes, you have to, right, Pat, you have to, yes, because if you just put in data that we know is bad, then it could falsely give it validity, right? And someone's like, well, it's on the blockchain, so it must be true. And you're like, well, not necessarily, because anyone could put that on there, right? We have to still have some way to measure that veracity or the validity, or where did that come from? And I think that's why some sort of central repository, something that you could weigh it out yourself, then you could figure those things out.
Yeah, well, I think there's several methods for dealing with that issue. I think one of those methods is understanding that this, like anything other technology, is a tool, right? And so in terms of having updated information, if you know something new, you can always add that updated information. And you could say, well, they used to think that it was, in the school of, but now we realize it was actually student X, or it was master Y, or whatever it is, because we have this new information. It's not like you can't amend it, you can. And but the other point is like you say, where is this coming from? And I think that as trusted content providers, we, Crozier, Authentify, Articheck, other members, we can provide content and there will be an element of trust associated with us, as the content providers. So I think that's another important aspect.
Yeah, the blockchain actually gives you an opportunity to get better reputation data, essentially, from the contributors, from my perspective. So that's simple example in the art world or in the crozier shipping world is who did the measurements of the piece, right? That's going to help us figure out, is this enough for us to build a crate against, or just make maybe a rough shipping plan against? And so that type of information, just where did this come from, is actually really, really valuable. And I actually think the blockchain offers opportunities to solve for that better than the rest of the world does today.
Absolutely. So I am just going to, I've seen that there is a question from the audience in the chat, and I'm going to read it out. Valerie Kincaid, hello Valerie, says, how might this serve but also affect the appraisal industry? Are they supportive or perhaps concerned? And she also says, would such a system need to include the identifier being physically attached to the object, as in an RFID? So I think that's a good question for Carrie, because I know you have a lot of RFID aspects to your offering.
Yes, yes. So we'll go into that. So yes, we lean heavily into NFC. So two types of RFID technology, NFC and UHF. And so NFC is your near field, which is, and we firmly believe, like, you've got to have something that connects your physical to your digital. Because if you don't have some sort of identifier there, so it means you're going to end up with a lot of identifiers, but that's why having a space to make sense of those and list those out so you can see them, because you need something that makes that bridge. Because if you never make that bridge, then you always have this risk, this vulnerability that there wasn't a moment where you recorded, or you need some kind of connection, right? And so we've done a lot of research, a lot of development into what tags, how to use it, how to be mindful of materials, where to put things, the security of tags. I think for our industry, having the most amount of security that you can, right? So that includes like, what's the adhesive, and how easily would it, with NFC, they're connected to URLs, right? So can you share that URL? Is there some security around that URL? How long do you have access to information? All of those types of things. We see UHF, which is more of the tags that you use in an inventory type situation. So if you had like a corporate account, or say maybe something like Crozier, if you're storing things, it gives you more of a long range communication and connection to that art. And so it can just help for organization purposes in keeping your system very efficient. But we absolutely see that in the physical world, you need that bridge, that connection, so that that this is the object. Now, we think ultimately using the object itself and moving into types of imaging that could end up being that identifier, like that's really where you want to get to. That the object itself is its own identifier. You don't necessarily need the NFC or the UHF, even though they have their own separate benefits. But the imaging itself and being able to identify through that is the goal. That's the long road. That technology needs to be scaled, but this is a good start, right? And to Nicole's point, we got to start somewhere, and you start simple so that we can start to figure out, like, here's the simple solution, and then what are the holes, right? Like, where do we need to go from there? And you just got to start somewhere, right? And I think we've seen a very good adoption of NFC, which makes me really excited, right? People are really getting into that, being able to understand, and that connection, and the value of it, especially as we come into the NFT world. So yeah, so we're a big proponent of doing that part.
So I think my personal take on it is that because there are, I don't know how many objects of art and cultural value in the world, but quite a few. There are collections that have millions in just their one organization, right? And I know that RFID has been something in the museum mind of a wish list for over a decade, because I remember people talking about it when I was still working in museums. And I know that there's various challenges associated with actually, getting those things to happen in these kind of glacially moving institutions. And, A lot of institutions have accession numbers, which are just based on like the year they were acquired. That's kind of the standard in the museum world. And, but I think that, and we've been talking about this very actively recently when building our prototype for AIS of, you know, what is that physical identifier? What's the minimum requirement, right, to have that kind of physical identifier? And I think that realistically, and, you know, still this is kind of TBC in terms of the exact requirements that we end up agreeing upon. But in my opinion, you're going to need to accept, at least in the early stages, you know, different things. And it could be, you know, a set of detailed images. You know, for example, with condition images, you often have images that are not going to be faked because it's about flaws and defects and marks and aspects and, you know, things from like underneath the hood, as it were, of the artwork. And so those can be helpful. RFIDs can be helpful. You can't always attach RFIDs directly to an object. It might be attached to, you know, a crate or a box that contains the object. And then there's a question about, you know, has that been moved? And there's also different types of tags. You know, there's smart tags and there's, you know, lots of different things on the market. And so I think you have to accept that. And also, I mean, in an ideal world, right, you would be assigning an identifier to something as it's born, right, when it's created, and you can image it.
Yes.
And you can know that that's authentic. You can get that artist certification, and it can kind of track through its lifetime. And that's, you know, hopefully what we'll get to moving forward in the future once this thing is created, this set of standards. But going backwards, you know, we have to be pragmatic, and we have to do our best, and we have to recognize the fact that whatever pragmatic approach we take is going to be a step up from the nothing that exists now. And so, you know, unfortunately, you know, there are a lot of potentially fakes out there. I know that Dr. Sarancini, who you guys work with at Authentify, has said as a keynote speaker at the Authentication in Art conference that I also spoke at in The Hague like 4 or 5 years ago. I remember he said, and he works with the FBI and is, you know, very well regarded and has worked with, you know, Botticelli's and Da Vinci's and kind of all the greats as a forensic expert. And he has estimated that there could be, I mean, I don't even want to repeat the high percentage that he said about how many like potential fakes there are in the market, because I don't want to scare everyone in the room, but it's a high
I like to say
percentage.
misattributed and, you know, because it is ultimately, when you come down to it, we can't forget that part of the learning process for centuries has been to, you know, mimic the hand of the master, right? Exactly. So, you know, I think I prefer, like, you know, it's misattributed, right? We don't know. Someone is presuming that or wanting it to be this thing, and we just don't really know. And that's where all this work comes from. And I think, you know, you're right. Like, we have to start somewhere, and we can start light. It's okay, right? Because a full implementation is expensive. It's costly. But, you know, when you're doing stuff like exhibitions and you're moving that art, it's a great opportunity, you know, to give it a born-on date.
Yep. And so the final aspect of that point was about the appraisal industry. So we would really, actually, we have not at AIS engaged with the appraisal industry yet, Valerie. We would love to do that. And so if you want to, you know, make any introductions for us, we would be very pleased to have that engagement and that interaction. I think that the appraisal industry is going to be a really great use case for AIS, and you know, engaging and interacting with it, and providing a lot of really useful data points to it. And I think that I know from having done a conference in Korea with some of the, I think the president and the vice president of the Art Appraisers Association of America, I remember from their talk that an extraordinary assumption is made about most appraisals that something is authentic, right? Because appraisers do not deal with authenticity. And so that's something already that is like, you know, could be a better situation in terms of the art world and how it's dealt with. Because I know that, for example, one of the reasons Dr. Sarancini suspects that there might be a lot of fakes in US museums is because there is an incentive for tax purposes to donate to museums, right? And yet, an appraisal is done as part of that requirement process, but an authenticity check is not. So There you go. That's a bit of a hole, which, a gap we were talking about earlier that could be perhaps filled in the future.
There is a project we know of, it's called Worth Hound, and that is like a consortium of appraisers that is coming together to work together to bring that data, right, even the appraisal space, and really create a better driven system, right, and again bringing transparency within that community and working together. And so I say there's great support, right, and it's just about I think for all of us, we're at the beginning, right? So it's really about coming together and building those consortiums and those collections even stronger.
Well, and what I can say is that we are working with insurers. AXA XL Art has recently come on board as an AIS member. They can see, the value of having this kind of structure in the future from an insurance point of view, which is, they deal with valuations as well. So it's kind of a closely related industry, and they pretty much believe that this is something that can help lead them to a future that they would like to see in terms of automating art insurance products, which they currently can't do, in terms of smoothing claims, in terms of actuary benefits of the data provision, and all kinds of different ways that it would have value from an insurance perspective to have this kind of setup. So Valerie has said that she's happy to make that introduction and that she thinks they'll be concerned about change. Yep, them and everybody else in this sector, but hopefully we can overcome that. So I think we are just about at time. I don't know if either of you had any other important points you think we have missed. Let me just quickly check my notes.
So there was a question, and I think Doug just put it in the chat, and I actually kind of want to, one of my closing things can kind of touch on that, which was sort of like what to do to start to, what can stakeholders do now? I think, it's about engaging from my perspective. For the shipper side of the world, like we have a certain amount of information that we think is really valuable for us to be able to get access to. And that's why we're really trying to be part of this and say, we think this is really important for the industry to do. At the same time, we recognize that a lot of the requirements around this need to come from, kind of the core of the art world, which is the artists, those who speak on behalf of the art in a way. Our conservators, our institutional partners, the academics. I think that's, the business side, we're all there to serve the rest of that from my perspective. And so I'm really hoping that there's a lot of engagement across the board. And the other thing I would just call out for Doug is just, I think getting, if you're a business and you don't feel like you have the right kind of platforms in place to be able to engage with a tool like an AIS standard, it would be start thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we are looking for all kinds of people to join AIS. This is also a good point for us to say, please join and become as active as you want to be, as you think is relevant to you and your business. I think we need a lot of different voices. We want to be very inclusive. The price point for membership is going to be very low. We are just now incorporating the nonprofit in Monaco at the moment, so we haven't even taken any dues yet from our members, but we will be doing that soon. But our whole price, strategy is all about inclusivity. So it's not going to be, prohibitively expensive or anything like that. And I also will just call out, as we have been discussing about artists and their voice, the fact that artist copyright and resale right is another really great example of a use case of how AIS can be really helpful. Something that people have been talking about for some time now is how, wouldn't it be great if, this is true in the UK, and I think in France, I don't think it's yet true in the US, but possibly partly because of the administrative consequences of creating laws and legislation like this, that, you know, in the UK, whenever an artwork is sold, a percentage or a fee goes to the artist, or is supposed to go to the artist. But that's, you know, it's difficult to track. DAX is the entity which is in charge of collecting those fees for copyright and also resale rights. And in the future, it would be great if we could, you know, automate that, because obviously the administration involved with that is very, you know, analog and manual and labor intensive. And so this would be great if, you know, like in the music industry, or, you know, other industries where artists get royalties wherever something is used or sold, you know, if we could kind of move more towards something like that, where artists can, you know, realize some more of the ever increasing value that a lot of their artwork gets when you read about, you know, how much something originally sold for, and, you know, what the artist got for it, and then even like 4 or 5 years later, how much it ends up going for, and how they don't see a dime of that. You know, it makes you definitely feel like it would be nice if we could address that issue in our industry. So, so yes, there's one more comment here, which is about sharing a link for more info about joining the AIS work group. Absolutely. Emma, if you are in the audience, would you mind please posting that link to the AIS website? And Eliza has also said that keep it going, and they are appreciative. So thank you, and thank you, Valerie, and thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, Carrie and Nicole, for joining us today. Really appreciate your participation. Have a great evening.
Sure. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.